It's a high-tech conversation.
And a low-tech topic.
Live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.
Welcome to Bench Talk 101. Tonight we have a lady who our very own Andy Brown found while researching information regarding his trigger shears. A female cutler making one-off knives and scissors in Sheffield with a PhD in metalwork and jewellery. Here to talk about how she became a scissor maker, ladies and gentlemen, Grace Horne.
Hello, good evening. What I thought I'd do is just do a little bit of a presentation about the work that I make and my various processes, and then open it up for questions afterwards. So, you know, if you have any questions about scissors or any questions regarding the kind of things that I've shown, then feel free to ask away, because I think that's the most interesting kind of part of it. I did actually call this talk The Confessions of a Self-Indulgent Maker, and that's mainly because I've been making for 30 years. I came to Sheffield to become a folding knife maker, and over the years I've realised that I make because I love making, and actually the end result, by the time I've finished my piece, it's kind of lost interest to me. I have no some people, when they make a piece, they want to keep hold of it because they've made some connection to it. As far as I'm concerned, once it's finished, it's irrelevant to me. It has done its job, and that is to entertain me during its making. And it's the making process that I love more than anything else in the world. So I'm going to show you some slides so you have an idea of the sort of work that I do. Let me see if I can do this without embarrassing myself with the amount of stuff that I have on my desktop. Okay. I love this quote, mainly because I'm not a manufacturer. If I am certain that I can finish a project, there's almost no point in me undertaking it to start with. I like the idea of stretching myself, of not being quite sure whether I can actually, I have the means to finish it. If I'm absolutely sure I can do it, it kind of loses some of its joy for me. That I don't skydive. I indulge in high risk making instead, and it's one of the reasons why I don't very often take on commissions. So I don't take orders and I don't take commissions. I basically do the projects that I want to make, and I work maybe 2 years ahead of where I am. So I've planned out my work that far in advance. And as I said, one of the reasons why I don't take on commissions is that there is a finite chance that it won't work. And in fact, one of the examples of a project that I'll show you in a few minutes failed. And it actually failed about 2 weeks before I would have, no, a little bit longer than that, maybe 3 weeks before I would have taken it over to America to my biggest show. And in my heart of hearts, I'm a researcher, and actually people were going, oh, you must have been gutted, it must be terrible. And people, because what happens is that I start showing my projects and involving people in the story of the project as it gets made. And then, so there were a whole load of people who were already invested in the project, and then it broke, and they were kind of like, oh, you must be gutted. And I kind of was, but actually, from a research point of view, its failure was as important as if it had actually succeeded. I mean, from a financial point of view, gutted, but from a researcher's point of view, a failure is as valid as a success. So yeah, that's why I'd call myself a self-indulgent maker. Right at the beginning, so we're going way back. This was the first set of knives that I made, and I made these for my degree. They were actually a set of 3 slip joints, and most knife makers, the process that people, or the kind of the progression normally is that people make fixed blade knives, and then they kind of get a bit adventurous and they make folding knives, and then they kind of move on to different types of folding knife. I never did that. I haven't ever had any interest in fixed blade knives particularly. It's always been folding knives, and part of that is the mechanism. So having to figure out the changing state of it being open and shut, and that of course has fed through into the scissors. So, you know, that idea that there is a mechanism that you have to get to work, that has always been fascinating to me. I actually did my degree in design, craft and technology down in South Wales in Cardiff. And at the time, the course that they were running was really quite unusual in that instead of choosing a subject area, you chose a material. So when I started, at the beginning, you did metal, wood, plastics and technology. And for instance, if you chose metal, you could do anything from structural ironwork to jewelry. That didn't matter. It was the fact that you were working in a material, and that really appealed to me. And the idea that a lot of my work is still very material driven is kind of an ongoing theme throughout. Anyway, I found jewelry a little bit small. Really loved working on the machinery, on the milling machine, on the lathe. And just as an aside, a few years ago, Women in Engineering asked me to give a series of talks to local students, secondary students, to kind of encourage women to think about engineering as a career. And they kind of grouped me in with a whole load of other real engineers, like electrical engineers, structural engineers, mechanical engineers, all those sort of things. And they called me a craft engineer, which I thought was a really fascinating title. And if you don't know my work, it's completely unhelpful. You wouldn't be able to identify my work from that title. But if actually it fits me really well. And that idea of kind of using machinery and getting things to work. Yeah, craft engineer, that kind of fits. Anyway, making things work appeals to me. Folding knives. I contacted Sheffield, the Cutler's Hall, and asked them whether there was anybody who could teach me to make folding knives. Now you have to look at the date on this. This is a long time ago. They said no, that there wasn't anybody still making knives in Sheffield. So I took apart a folding knife and tried to figure it out myself. They weren't great. They were made out of Damascus, and I had no idea that I'd still be as interested in patterned steel now as I was then. This has obviously been a long-standing love of mine. Part of it is to do with the fact that I'm really crap at surface decoration. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. It's too big. You could do anything. But Damascus steel, where the external pattern reflects the internal structure, that makes sense. That gives it a reason for existing. The fact that you can look at it and you can extrapolate the story of how it was made, yeah, by the results you can see. Love that. Still love it now. As far as the mechanism goes, these were meant to be slip joints. They weren't really. I still like the design. They didn't work. Okay, so I then left and did something else, went down to London, set up a workshop doing tableware, completely different. Heard a lecture on the radio from an interview of a gentleman called Stan Shaw, and he was being interviewed, and the interviewer was calling him the last little Mester of Sheffield. And he was talking about making folding knives in a traditional way. And I realized that the Cutler's Hall had lied to me, and that there were still people who were hand-making knives. So I tried to contact him, and he ignored me. He didn't answer his phone. It was only afterwards that I realized that his phone was unplugged in his workshop, so there was no chance of him ever responding to my telephone calls. So with the total arrogance of a 21-year-old, I packed up all my belongings and moved to Sheffield and camped on his doorstep and asked to become his apprentice, at which point he said no. He said no because he was sharing a workshop with a scissor maker, and they didn't want a woman in the workshop. Now, this is the only time that I've ever had a negative comment about being a female, and actually it wasn't. Because about 15 years ago, I realized that the reason why they didn't want a woman in the workshop was because there were two old men in an old Sheffield workshop. So there were 3 flights of stairs to go down to the courtyard where the toilets were. So they used to pee in a bucket in the corner, and they just decided that, and it was just too mortifying to have a female in the workshop when they either had to manage 3 flights of stairs up and down. And now I have a little bit more sympathy with old men bladders, and actually I can fully understand it. So it wasn't the fact that they didn't want a woman in the workshop. It was just that logistically it was too hard to manage. So, but he sent me away with a whole load of springs and blades, told me to figure it out myself because it wasn't that hard. I looked at setting up a workshop in Sheffield, and then discovered that Sheffield Hallam University was just starting a master's within metalwork and jewellery, and they were happy to let me hang around and do the master's, just making knives and edge tools. So I did that, spun that out for 5 years, meant to be doing it part-time for 4 years. Because I realised that actually it was cheaper to use their workshops than it was to set up on my own, basically. And they didn't stop on days that I shouldn't have been in. They didn't stop me using the workshops. And there's something really that being a student is like a magic word, particularly when you're trying to get links into industry. You can get a whole load of things done. There are a lot of companies, small companies, particularly around Sheffield, and also in other areas as well, who really like the idea of helping students and doing weird and wonderful projects for them in a way that they would never do for another company. So if you're just approaching them as an individual and you're saying, can you do this strange thing? They might not do it. But, you know, if you approach them as a student and you're saying, is there any chance that you could do 3 pieces of these when they'd normally do 3,000 as a minimum, then sometimes they're willing to do that. So using connections, using the workshop, I stayed in doing an MA. I learned my lesson and stayed and did a PhD as well. And that was less, although it's a practical based PhD, I was looking at solid state diffusion bonded Damascus steels and its role within custom knife making. So I was using layers of silver and steel, laminating them and then turning them into knives, or seeing whether I could. And the two kind of the 2 questions were, is it possible and is it worth it? And yes, it's possible, and no, it's not worth it. But I had a wonderful time. I know that some people are traumatized by their PhDs, but I loved it. And one of the things that it taught me was that I love research. And I love that idea of finding information and documenting change, and that sort of thing. And that's really stood me in good stead over the years doing my own professional practice. After doing my PhD, I actually went round and did a postdoc research project where I went round a lot of the people within Sheffield and kind of picked up skills. So rather than staying with one person, I kind of moved around. Now, this is me with Brian the grinder. I didn't realize that his name was Brian Alcock until much later. Everybody knew him as Brian the grinder, and he was a traditional grinder, working on big wheels, running through a water trough. And he taught me how to grind that way, and it's very different from grinding on a belt. It goes the other way. It goes away from you rather than towards you, and your hands are very much more on the actual material because it doesn't get hot in the same way. It's rather like grinding in a cave, in that you have the water dripping down and it's all a bit moist, and yeah, that was lovely. Brian's dead now, but his workshop is still going. Robin Wood of Wood Tools has kept that going for grinding axes, so that's lovely. And I still use that as a resource when I need to. Over the years, I mainly stayed within folding knives. I did a couple of research projects and stuff for people like Spyderco. I went over and spent some time with them, looking at their design and development department. And then finally, there was this was the key knife. I made this knife, and I wanted to make a pair of scissors that went in it out of matching Damascus. And I realized that the scissors were okay, but I realized that if I didn't actually know how to make them any better or to correct the faults that they had. So I started doing research into scissor making and realized that it's an incredibly poorly documented craft skill. The only kind of allied craft skill that I can find that is even more poorly documented is needle making. But that's a whole different rabbit hole to fall down. Scissor making is one of those things that just hasn't really had its day in the sunshine, really, of kind of people looking at making scissors. But there was still a company in Sheffield called Ernest Wright's, and they were still making scissors. And at the time, this is 12 years ago, there were 3 old guys working there, and Nick Wright, the young owner of the company. And the 3 guys who were actually working were all over 65. And I went down and talked to them and realized that there was that really had an air about it, that if these guys died, they were the last ones, and unless I went down and learned to make scissors from them, there was every chance that nobody would be there. So that's what I did. Just as a little bit of an aside, that didn't happen. Nick died, and the company went into receivership, and a Dutch gentleman called Paul bought the company, and I was incredibly worried about it. Wrongly, as it happens, he doesn't have any previous knowledge of manufacturing or scissor making at all. He's a software engineer, I think, semi-retired. Bought the company because he bought one of the Kickstarter rewards, I think. And I was very worried that the company at that stage would just fizzle out. It hasn't. We've now got, I think, 5 young people working there. He's invested a huge amount in the company, and so if anybody's interested in kind of batch made but handmade scissors from Sheffield, I would thoroughly recommend Ernest Wright's scissors. They're better now than they ever have been. Their quality control is much better, and they're really investing in their young people and training them up, which I think is great. So although it felt at the time as if it was a dead end, and that, yeah, this was the end of the road as far as scissor making goes, it wasn't. It was touch and go for a while. While I was there at Ernest Wright, I originally only wanted to learn to make the little scissors to go into my folding knives, and they wouldn't let me. They said that wasn't feasible. I should start making mid-size scissors, and they made me do everything. So right from the little stalk scissors that you can see here at the top right, middle top, all the way through to the larger scissors down below. And they were absolutely right. You know, the sort of techniques that you use on small scissors are not the same as on big scissors. They're all trying to do the same thing fundamentally, to get that kind of curve and twist and pressure on the blades, but how they resolve that it can be very different. After having done that and felt like I had a kind of certain basis of understanding, my big problem was that there was no way that I could afford the specialist grinding machines that they have that put the curve and the twist on the inside of the blades. So when I left there, my first project was to try and find out whether there was any way that I could bring scissor making back to an artisan scissor making process so that it was accessible within a knife making workshop, so you didn't need specialist equipment. And my eureka moment was when I found this book, which was on the Treatise of Manufacturers in Metal, and they were describing the pre-industrial process of making scissors. And it was a relatively small bit of text that describes how the scissors, the curve is put on pre-heat treat, and then they are packed and they're bound together with wire before the heat treat. And this revolutionizes the process of making scissors for me. So the Ernest Wright scissors they're drop forged blanks, and then they're heat treated relatively early on. I think they're just the pivot hole is drilled and tapped, and then at that point they go straight off to be heat treated. On my process, the heat treating is much later. I do a huge amount of filing. Most of my work is filed. I very rarely, the standard joke when anybody comes to my workshop is that my grinders are the most expensive cobweb catchers in the world, because actually I use files pretty much all the time. And because I'm filing, I actually heat treat much later in my process. And this eureka moment of being able to see how it was done before, I love the idea of the fact that two things really, that the research informs my practice. So often research is separate to practice, and to have an example of that where it actually not only does it inform my practice, but it was inherent to it, you know, there would have been no other way of doing it. And also the idea that a process that was considered redundant. So actually when the writer was describing this process, he was actually saying how old-fashioned it was, you know, that these new technologies that are coming out will supersede these processes that are done here. And the idea that I am now going back to these pre-industrial superseded techniques to make it relevant and doable today, I think is really exciting and make it accessible. So this is the sort of scissors that that I have been producing. These are kind of these are standard 6-inch, nice and straightforward. Now these are quite an interesting one. How am I doing on time? Oh dear, I'm already blabbering. Right, okay. So these are quite interesting because these are all made from the same drop forge blank. So these are a vintage drop forge blank that I got hold of. And because of the way that I file them, you can turn them into completely different looking pairs of scissors. Now, it's always been so from the time when we were drop forging, so we transferred over in Sheffield from hand forging scissor blanks to drop forging them. It always was the way that it was expensive to get the drop forging dies made. So if you could get a drop forge die made and then file it so it looked like a completely different pair of scissors, then that was one way of looking like you had a whole load of variations without the initial cost of having new dies made. And in fact, if you look at old Joseph Rogers catalogues and that sort of thing, it looks like they have hundreds and hundreds of scissors, and they do. But if you look carefully, you can see that a lot of them are made from the same blank, but they just look different because they're being filed, fettled and finished differently. So yeah, you can see that you can get a huge variety. And this is an old process though. This is kind of historically acceptable process to kind of get that modification, that change from blanks. Okay. The way I work can be different. So this is a project that I did, which was to somehow embody a story. This was a piece called Twisted Seamstress, it was actually a collaboration with Josh Burrell, and he forged, this is actually, it's Micmacs and Damascus, and then Josh Burrell did the bulk of the forging for me, and then I fettled and finished it. And you don't need the story behind it, but this was kind of my version of a bodice dagger for a prostitute who would have called themselves a seamstress. They might have been a seamstress during the day, but the idea of being able to carry tools of the trade rather than a knife as a weapon, theoretically, it's a part of the Victorians fetishizing of this kind of piece. But one of the challenges on this was to take it from a forged piece and then get it to a stage that I could work it. And you can see, I mean, that twist was an inherent part of the process. I really wanted that not only to be part of the story, but also to be an inherent part of the piece. The forging precision on this is absolutely astonishing. And then to be able to get it so it fits together so perfectly, it's just it was a joy to do. And then part of my job was to enhance that twist by filing back into it, so that you really got the idea that it was one piece. And this is a process that I use quite a lot. I do quite a lot of wooden models to start with, so that I can see what the piece is like full time. These sketchbooks a lot, mainly because over the years with kind of care responsibilities and that sort of thing, I've had to be very, very focused when I go down to the workshop, because I can do my sketchbooks at home between childcare needs and kind of parent care needs and all that sort of thing. I can do that at home. So when I get 2 hours to go down to the workshop, I need to know what I'm doing when I go down there. So it all has to be very clearly planned. I can't spend time thinking about what I'm doing when I'm down there. I need to know when I go down. So my sketchbooks are really important to me as far as that planning goes, as are the models. So yeah, the drawing here, the wooden model on one side and the metal one, there is a certain amount of variation on them. And this is me filing. Oh, I do love my filing. I love it. That sounded slightly sarcastic, but I love it. I love draw filing. I find it very therapeutic. There's something about, I often draw in my sketchbook. Most of my pieces are drawn full size, and there's something about the drawing with my hand. I sometimes go into CAD when I need to, but most of my pieces are hand drawn, and there's something about the curve that my hand makes that works, and then it works on the piece as I'm making it. That's like a continuation, and then it works on when the person is holding it, and there's something about that really appeals to me. This is the little corset that she was wearing so this is the sheath, and then I covered it with glove leather. It's really quite sweet, so you can see it in and out of its little dagger pouch. Oh, and then this is a whole new set of pieces that I do where the process was, so that one was really driven by the story that I was wanting to tell about these about fallen women and prostitutes and seamstresses and bodice daggers. But this next project is all about the process, and this is the one that yeah, this is really exciting. So I think I'm going to be bold about this. I am the only person who uses wire EDM to make scissors, and there's a reason for that. I mean, the reason is that it's expensive, but the reason why I use it is that it has some key characteristics which I just love. Now I sew as well, and I'm obsessed about pattern matching, and the idea of taking two halves of a pair of scissors out of Damascus steel and then crossing them over and making them into a pair of scissors has always been a problem to me, because no matter, with the best will in the world, your Damascus pattern never matches, and if it matches on one side, it doesn't match on the other. So but instead of cutting two halves of Damascus, I cut the entire profile out of Damascus using wire EDM, and then cut halfway up the middle, and then I do a little bit of machining and the two halves fall apart, and then when I join them back together, they match. Now, okay, I accept that's difficult to get your head around. Let me show you some pictures. So this was not a very good example, but this actually was quite a fun project to do. It was made that way, so the same thing, the whole thing was cut out, and in fact this was a cigar scissors based on historical example, and you have a match striker and a pricker, and you have the bit that cuts off the tip of the cigar, but you also have a folding knife on it. And this felt like a full circle that I'd finally completed. So originally I'd wanted to make my scissors to go into my folding knives, but now I was making a folding knife that went into my pair of scissors. So it felt like I had completed that loop. But these were all cut out. Unfortunately, the pattern of the Damascus wasn't the right one to have chosen for this project because it isn't as clear as I would have liked, but this was made that way. So there was a full continuation of pattern throughout the entire piece. Okay, this is my version. This was the original. This was the source of inspiration. This was a pair of scissors that sprung, and on each side there was a little folding knife, and I decided to make this out of a bar of Damascus, inch square. And you can see here, these were the cuts that I made using the wire EDM. So that, there was that one. And then when it all went together, the pattern, when it was all back assembled, the pattern, the twist went all the way through the piece. That was the one that broke. It was my Damascus, it was entirely my fault. And there was a flaw in one of the welds, and it went through one of the back springs. Quite tragic. This is an example that's a little bit clearer. So this was done, this series is a set of calligraphy scissors based on Persian calligraphy scissors from the 18th century, with these nesting bows. It's quite an iconic shape. And this whole process was twofold. How efficient can I be using a billet of Damascus? So this one billet ended up doing 5 pairs of scissors, and that was incredibly efficient. And you can see that the shape of them was just that triangular shape, and I really loved the idea of how much of the iconography of scissors could I remove and still have useful scissors. So you can see that when these are shut, that the pattern goes across the shanks from side to side. And this was another one in the same set that I did, and these have little arms that come out on the side, and then when it's all assembled, the pattern is continuous from one side to the other. And in fact, on this one, I took it just that little bit further and packed out. So the cut that you get on wire EDM machine is about 0.3 of a millimeter. So what I did was pack between each cut with little gold kind of buffers, so that they were packed out when they were shut. They kind of were held apart on, at the correct. It was lovely. I loved it. I did 2 of these, and that really, really hollow grind on the inside of those scissors again is very indicative of this period of scissors. And then finally, because I know that I'm rattling on, this next project is a design project, and it's the one that I'm working on at the moment. This is a commission for my sins, and this lady approached me, and she does historical reenactments. In fact, what she does, she's a silhouette cutter. So it's quite an amazing thing. She sits there, she looks at you, and she cuts your profile out of black paper, and it looks like you. I just find it mind-blowing. she does that while you wait. I couldn't imagine working under pressure like that. But she works very often does living history reenactments, and she works in museums a lot. And she approached me because the scissors that she uses are modern scissors, and she wanted ones that were more period accurate. So we talked about that a little bit, and I gave her a price for making scissors, which she didn't think that she could justify. So I said, well, an alternative could be that if I look at your scissors that you know you like and you use, there are certain details on them that make them look modern. And in the same way that I went and I altered the blanks earlier on and made them look very different, we can do that to a modern pair of scissors. So this is what gives modern scissors the modern look. That bit of webbing at the top where the shanks go into the finger bows, the fact that it's curved round is a dead giveaway for a modern pair of scissors, drop forged pair of scissors. You would have expected that to have been filed away. So the period that we're looking at here is ideally between the period that she's wanting us to look at is 1820 to 1840. That's kind of quite a set period, but that's fine. That gives us something to work with. There are no examples that I can find where even the most basic scissors have that webbing. The other thing that gives these away as modern scissors is the angle of that shoulder there. That in fact, the period scissors are very much steeper than that. This shallow angle isn't very, in fact, I've only found one example of that, and that was actually, oddly enough, much earlier. And then the other thing is that treatment of that flat area around the screw. So this is what the sort of things that I'm talking about. So instead of having that webbing curving in, having that really defined kind of interaction between the shank and the finger bow, and that can only really be achieved through filing. There is no alternative to that, and that's one of the things that make it period, you know, that it would have been filed originally, it needs to be filed now, and just by removing that arc, that webbing, you get a very different feel. And instead of, so just looking at this area around the screw hole here, instead of having it flat and square across, having that chamfer on each side. Now you can see there's a little drawing over to the left of the screen here, and you'll see that throughout these next few pictures. And these are actually drawings from a scissor maker, from a Sheffield scissor maker. They were brothers, and they were called the Rag Brothers, and their books that I've kind of managed to kind of get hold of and document have dates on, so I know that these designs are dated from 1830. In fact, these are 1837. And some of the drawings are quite rough. They were only ever meant for their own interest. They weren't meant for public distribution. And I was very lucky to be able to go down and spend some time with the workshop books and actually photograph them and have them for my own records too. So you can see that shoulder coming in and also the variations. And one of the things that I was proposing, and I don't know whether we will do it or not, is that I can fake that steeper shoulder. So although I can't change the pair of scissors with the shallow shoulder, I can file in details that mean that visually you get that image, that aesthetic of it being earlier. You can see again on the left one of these little workshop drawings, and what I love about them is that a lot of the drawings that are there also have all the workshop costs, so they're all broken down into the cost of the original steel and the forging and the finishing and the heat treating and the buffing and the putting together and all that, and it's broken down into the cost. And the idea that my sketchbooks have that information in as well, and that I'm doing something that a scissor maker did in Sheffield 200 years ago, I just think that's just amazing to me, that idea of that continuation of process and need. And yeah, I just think it's lovely. I haven't resolved the final design yet. I'm still thinking about it. But you know, yeah, we'll get there. In fact, I've decided that what I'm going to do is one of the issues with my client was that she was worried that the bevels on either side of that flat of the screw might change the feel of the pair of scissors, and as she uses them a lot, and she knows she likes them, she was worried that they might make them a little bit handle it a little bit differently. And she's actually coming to visit next 2 weeks time. So I decided that actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy another pair of those scissors so that I can keep one as the factory has given them to us, and I can modify the other one so that I can do a direct comparison between the two. Because I said to her, theoretically, it will alter the way it handles, but how much and whether you'll be able to feel it, I don't know. And I didn't like the idea of telling her that I don't know. So if I've got her here, I might as well make the most of the fact that I can do this side-by-side test and actually check it out. And that's it. That's it. So.
Oh, Grace, thank you so much. That was fantastic. A super sharp presentation.
Let me see if I can get rid of sharing.
It's such a good presentation that I had to remind people they needed to put hands up if they had questions. They were so enthralled with it. So, if you're happy for some questions,
I am, absolutely.
Let's start with Jim.
Grace, that was absolutely fantastic. I've actually followed you for quite a few, I think, years now on Instagram. So I saw the advert and I thought, wow, who arranged that? So good man, Andy. Well done. Yeah, I've been fascinated by your work. It's aesthetically very similar to what I like to achieve, nowhere close to that quality. But I hadn't realized the depth at which you'd gone into both in education and you know, previous work that you've done, and the research that you've done with various craftspeople, and that's it's probably why you've ended up being top of the game. EDM, that fascinates me. It's something that's new to me. Could you expand upon that process, because it's something that I feel might interest me before you get that?
Yeah, absolutely. So wire EDM is a spark erosion process, and it's not new technology, but it's generally out of reach because it's expensive. It's incredibly slow. But basically what it is they pass a brass wire up to the steel, and then a spark jumps across it, and it kind of moves really slowly, and you can cut through 4-inch steel slowly, but you can cut through it. And to have such a thin cut is quite extraordinary. It's kind of modification or a kind of variation on the other spark erosion techniques, like you know, you can die sink with spark erosion as well, where they bring an electrode down and it sparks, and then because it sparks and burns away a bit of the material, it leaves a cavity. It's the same thing but with wire. Yeah, it's one of these engineering. I'm very lucky because we still have these small engineering companies in Sheffield that are happy to let me go down and play on their machines. Really, I mean, it's always they have to fit me in between decent paying jobs, but luckily over the years I've made friends with the owner of the company, and he's as intrigued by my mad projects as I am, really. So it's always nice to go down and kind of tell him what crazy thing I'm going to ask him to do next.
Oh, so this is in an industrial machine rather than something that's in your workshop, but it's not a sort of desktop version.
No, there is no desktop version.
I'm sorry about this. He just picked the wrong time.
Yeah, there is no desktop
had somebody
version.
come to the door.
It's in somebody else's workshop. It's not particularly a big machine, but it is generally for industrial use.
And is it quite expensive, I take it?
Yes. Yeah, the setup is I mean, I say it's expensive, but I mean, so many people these days seem to be fine spending lots of money with kind of you know, machining that I guess it's quite specialist, but I love it. I think it's great. It certainly has opened up a whole load of machining as far as I'm concerned. There's one at the university as well. I teach at the university part-time, and there, in theory, there's one there, but the students keep using it. Trying to be too disgruntled by the students.
How unfortunate.
I know. It's also quite a temperamental
of them.
It's quite a temperamental machine, and every time the wire snaps. So I mean, over the years, I've learned to get really clean Damascus. So if anybody makes Damascus for me, I always try and encourage them to make it without flux. Because if there's any inclusion still in the steel, when the wire comes up to the metal, instead of it sparking across, it stays there and then it breaks the wire. And then you have to rethread it.
Sure.
So part of the deal with my the guy who does the machining for me is that I have to be there and stand by the machine and rethread the machine every time it goes put. But that's a small price to pay.
Well, it's been fantastic. I'm terribly sorry about he picked the wrong time to have a visitor at the front door. So thank you so much. It was unique, fascinating, and extremely well presented. So thank you, Grace, for coming on.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Jim. Let's go to Matthias.
Well, Alfie.
I will reiterate what Jim was after saying. Thank you so much. That was absolutely mind-blowingly fascinating. I mean, the level at which you do your work puts basically the most of the rest of the world to shame. But that aside,
What is your problem?
I was kind of curious. I love Ernest Bright's scissors. I have several of them, both in the shop and in the house, and so you said they are good batch-made scissors. What is sort of what makes the difference? So to step away from the level of work that you are doing and go back to the kind of scissors that most of us will come across. What is it that make a good pair of scissors? What is the difference between decent scissors and indecent scissors? And because I think most industrially made ones these days are so at the best.
Yeah, I think that the big thing with good scissors is that they're entirely metal. You know, I think that these days, you know, you can actually buy pretty good scissors. They're such an overlooked tool. And I'm constantly amazed that the sort of scissors that we can get 3 for £1 from IKEA actually do cut, because you know, they when you look at them and this is part of the problem with scissor making, is that scissors are really hard to retro engineer. So if you took one of those pairs of scissors apart, it would be really, even I would find it difficult to see the key bits that make scissors work. And I always thought that being a slip joint maker for all those years was excellent training for being a scissor maker, because there you can get a piece that is 90% finished in an hour, and that is that last bit, that last 10% that takes you days and days of kind of getting it so it's really slick, that it works really well, that it does what it's meant to do, and you know, all those things that turn it from something that is actually really quite a basic tool into something that is a joy to use.
Yeah.
So I mean, one of the things that I think that that make Ernest Wright scissors. So I always send people down to Ernest Wright if they're trying to buy a pair of scissors, mainly because I so rarely have anything to sell.
Indeed.
Because they have a real connection with tradition, so they are still getting their dye. Some of the pieces are still vintage dyes that they're using, but where they need to, they're actually remaking the dyes, and they're getting pieces drop forged for them in Italy. Now they can't get them made in the UK because there's just nobody set up for that, but you know, they can get them still from Italy. And then, you know, they're doing all their grinding, and having actually the most important person in the scissor making process is the putter togetherer.
Yeah.
And this is the final process where they're actually kind of setting that curve and that twist and making sure that they work well. And there's a lovely thing. So the putter togetherer is a proper job title, and it was always the best paid and the most kind of highest status of the scissor making trade. And if you look at the census reports through the years in Sheffield, you realize that scissor makers weren't necessarily the most literate of people, so they don't always know how to spell putter togetherer, and sometimes they're put together, and sometimes they're putter togetherer, and sometimes they're putter together, and they're like, they don't actually know where the word ends, and sometimes they just say that they're putters. So yeah, they're all that thing, and that kind of, and I think that is really where, that's where all the skill is. That's where the long the kind of the passing down of skills comes in, and that's the real value of Ernest Wright. And there's no substitute, you know, that if you look at something and it doesn't quite work, how do you put it right? Is it irretrievable? Does it have to be thrown away? Or is it a relatively simple fix? And that being able to treat each pair of scissors as an individual. So scissors traditionally are marked on the inside with a marker number, so that the two halves are paired up and they stay together throughout their entire life, like right from the original forging to the final putting togethering stage. And you can't transfer one blank to the other half, you know, they just won't fit together. The whole idea is that actually each one of those pairs of scissors is its own little unique little pair of scissors, which I think is great.
It is, absolutely. This touches on, maybe I shouldn't ask this question already because I'm sure someone else will, but grinding and sharpening scissors, is this something maybe we should save for when everybody else has had their questions, or should you go into it already? Because I have the impression you could probably talk about it for a while. On the other hand, I think we're interested.
No, I can talk you through sharpening your pair of scissors. Okay, so there are people who professionally sharpen scissors, and they do it, and it's a highly skilled occupation. And I'm actually I'm a member of a few scissor sharpening forums, and they just get completely obsessed by sharpening scissors, mainly hairdressing scissors. Hairdressers have very specific needs, mainly because they're using them a lot every day, and you know, they know what they like and they know what they've been trained with. Most good hair salon sharpeners will completely separate the scissors and grind them on the inside, unless you're sharpening professionally. There is no need for that. So if I'm sharpening my scissors, I don't feel the need to do that. I don't take them apart at all. Let me see if I can find a pair of scissors to demonstrate on. So what I do is I open the pair of scissors and I clamp it, and then you can see that you've got secondary bevel and you've got a primary bevel right on the edge here. Now I would, on that main grind right along the edge here, what you can do is you can use magic marker or something like that, and you can just go along that edge, and then you match whatever angle is there I would just stick with that. And you can use a stone or kind of anything like that, even a diamond file, or if it's really, you have to remember that scissors are surprisingly soft, so you can even use a normal file. And as long as you match that angle, you should be absolutely fine. Don't touch the inside surfaces at all, just that outside. The important thing to remember once you've stoned that is that you don't shut your scissors straight away. You keep them open, and then you press the two blades apart as you shut them, and then as you open them again, you remove the burr. And if you just do that a couple of times, then that means that you'll have kind of honed that edge. If you just shut them, then very often you get little nicks on the surfaces as the two burrs clip into each other.
Yeah.
So it's quite straightforward. Stone on that angle that is already there. Push the blades apart when you shut them.
Yeah,
no
and it would be the same on a wet grinder, I suppose. You would grind the outside bevel and not touch the inside. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Matthias. Chester.
Hello.
Hello.
Astounding. I'll get all the compliments out early before my questions, but really astounding, a wonderful presentation, and you gave so much great information. Above and beyond that, your drawings are fascinating and lovely, and it looks like you put as much into your drawings as you do into your scissors, and it's a sign of your work ethic, because it shows in your presentation that you're not only trying to accomplish making a good pair of scissors or even a great pair, but you have an aesthetic about you that in your explanation of how you feel about Damascus steel and seeing those layers, you take it apart in your mind, and it's really an artistic venture. So I don't want to diminish that artistic side of it, and so I'll leave you with those compliments, and explain that I'm from a family of my mother was a costumer, and she had a shop in Greenwich Village in New York making dresses, and our whole house was full of those mannequins behind you. So I'm assuming that that's your sewing room.
Yes.
And I have 2 or 3 still in my sewing room, but I my questions refer to number one, and I have a couple. Number one is, I noticed that in a lot of your scissors, you do matching handles. Not in the one where it's the nesting, and that really threw me off. I think that's just lovely. But you seem to do the same rings on each side. There's a symmetry to it. And I'm used to, particularly with tailor shears, having a larger oval in the bottom one and the thumb one on the top, as well as bevels to them, so that when you insert your thumb, you're accommodating that part rather than them being equal. So I wanted to ask about that and the size of your scissors, because through this venue, it's very difficult to see if you're making larger or if they're all about 10 inches or 8 inches. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I love some response to those too.
Well, my natural inclination is to work small. And I love doing the little embroidery scissors. They kind of, if I have to do something time and time again, I love those little kind of 3.5 inch ones. I love them. I have done bigger scissors. Did these.
Oh yeah.
So these have that that really ergonomic shaping. And these are hand forged, and again, yeah. So these were a project that I did for a left-handed tailor down in Savile Row, and so these are 13 inch. And one of the things that we had to do was make this was me working with Josh Burrell. I can forge, but I'm not a good forger, and I am completely unwilling to compromise the quality of my project just because I can't do it. I would much rather work and do a collaboration with somebody whose skills will actually mean that I can get the project that I'm after. So yeah, this was the first left-handed 13 inch pair. You can actually see that they have they were wrought iron, and they have a welded on
edge to the front.
edge. I can't remember what the steel was on that, but it was the much harder tool steel. EM42, I think.
And it has the seat in the back for dragging on the table when you're cutting.
Yeah.
Because I have scissors for cloth, I have scissors for paper, I have scissors for denser things, and I would never use, only because I was taught by my mother, that you don't use your cloth scissors on paper, and you don't intermix them, and we were never allowed to use her shears that she would do pattern cutting with, for fear of damaging them. But yeah,
these days, now you know how to sharpen the scissors, it's actually less critical for you to not use them against paper, and it's less of an issue now than it used to be, because the when paper used to be made, they would include all sorts of other things like chalk and other things. So that was really corrosive on the blades, or kind of really abrasive on the cutting surfaces. These days, with reasonable quality paper, it's not. I was also told never to use sewing scissors on paper.
Well, and I've been sharpening scissors for probably 30 years now, for other people mostly, but also for myself. But the other thing is that the test of a good scissor to me is that the tip cuts well too, because oftentimes you'll get a good cut in here, but not necessarily at the tip. And a good pair of scissors to me, almost like snipping, almost like the little scissors that you'd use for ripping a seam.
Yes.
You know, so
it's by far, when you're making scissors, that's that last third, that last quarter maybe, is the most often the bit that doesn't work. And that there's a lot that can go wrong. You know, you can pretty much always get a pair of scissors working for that first half, but that tip, that can be a real effort to get it working. Yeah.
Well, I'll just finish my question with one more compliment, and very impressed and very impressive presentation, and thank you for doing it for us.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
Thanks, Chester. Let's go up to Scotland, where Scott is waiting with a question.
Evening, Grace.
Hello, Scott.
It's been a few years. I started following you a fair while ago. Andy Brown put me on to you. And one of the things that fascinated me at first was your use of Damascus. I've only dabbled in it very, very lightly, and I find it fascinating. Watching your coffee etching on live streams and Instagram was phenomenal. I absolutely loved that. Even just sitting watching you cleaning the pieces before you put them in the coffee, it's obviously that's one of the essential things, is that they're very, very clean. And I've dabbled in coffee etching, and I've tried ferric chloride, and I'm not getting good results. And I'm using ferric chloride, I think it's like 96%, I think, is that right? Just the kind of stuff you buy off, I don't know. But what I was finding was, no matter how long I left it in the ferric chloride, it seemed to stop reacting. What it seemed to me was it was building a layer of something on the outside of the steel, stopping the ferric chloride from allowing it to actually etch deeper. Is that possible?
Yes. Yeah, it is.
So what's the answer?
You have to keep stirring it. So you have to keep agitating it. And traditionally you'd use a feather to kind of keep brushing over it to kind of agitate it. But I don't use ferric at all. What steels are you using in your Damascus?
Cheap ones from eBay. I just picked up some cheap blanks from eBay to try it. I do have, I've been making stuff and joining it onto 01. So I'd need to then go in with nail varnish to stop the 01 from reacting in the Damascus. And I've got a little blank that I had in and out of Damascus, in and out of ferric chloride, I don't know how many times, and then tried coffee etching, because I know that darkens the etch, and I'm just not getting it deep enough. I'd like it to be more undulating in the actual finish, so that then when I clean up the kind of nickel steel on the top, it comes up more polished, leaving the darker bits in between.
It's counterintuitive, but I would actually suggest that you use more dilute ferric. More dilute acid, so that it's not, what you might be getting is that it's corroding the high points as well as the low points. Yep. So dilute it down a little bit further and see whether that works. And it's going to be a slow process of you kind of agitating, taking it out, and then buffing the top surface or cleaning the top surface with a fine wet and dry, and then putting it back. And what you're basically doing is you're continually polishing those high surfaces whilst not doing anything with the valleys, and they'll just keep etching further and further.
So you said dilute it further. Is there a mix? It's 50% water and 50% ferric chloride,
or even more than that, and try it warm. There's all sorts of things. I mean, I don't use any acid. I just go straight into the coffee. And there's a little bit of topography, but there's not a huge amount. That just happens to be my preference. If you're after topography, then you're going to have to etch it. And without knowing,
I've seen knife makers actually, when they leave it in the ferric chloride for far too long, it just dissolves. Left it overnight, they bring it back out and there's nothing left. And I had this in there for like half an hour, 45 minutes, longer and longer each time. And it then I would take it out and clean it all up and buff it back and try it again. And it just seemed to stop working. Yeah.
I mean, it's difficult to know when you don't know what the materials are. So generally I'll use 15N20 in one of the 1080 series, so 1084 or 1085. And that gives me the best contrast between the shiny 15N20. I
asked Jim Hendricks, who's here, and he said, oh, that's a dark art. Even etching on its own is a dark art, never mind actually working with it and joining it onto other steels and stuff like that. So, and I found that whole curve, I hit like a stopper right at the very beginning, and I haven't actually managed to get past that. And to go back to experimenting with different dilutes, and then it's all the cleaning and everything else, it's time consuming, and I found it really, really frustrating.
Yeah, frustrating, and it is.
I'll dig in. No, I'll keep going. That was an amazing talk tonight. Thank you.
Which is one of the reasons why I try and stick to the metals that I know, because I know that I can get results, and it's too soul destroying to spend ages on a piece and then not be able to etch it up or have a muddy surface. The interesting thing about scissors and Damascus, particularly on the stainless ones, is that scissors, I'm going to show you on these, even though these aren't my scissors, but they only get hardened. Traditionally, they only get hardened up to that point, and the shanks and the bows remain soft. And one of the reasons for that is that as you sharpen them, you might get a little bit of fish mouth gaping like that. And if the bows and the shanks are soft, you can tap them back in so that the gap closes. You can only do that if they haven't been cast. Some of the big scissors have been cast, and then you just snap them and it doesn't work. But traditionally, that's what would happen. Now, on Damascus, if you differentially temper or differentially harden them, the Damascus pattern sometimes can be really mushy. Up there, it likes to be hardened. Some of the Damascuses, the pattern only comes out if they're hardened. So that can be frustrating too.
It could be annealed, so it makes it, that might be the difference. I think it's annealed Damascus, which could be. It's just, there's so many problems that can happen.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure to meet you tonight. Your talk was amazing. I loved it, and I'll jump back into your live streams again when you're doing them.
Yeah, good luck on the Damascus etching.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Let's go over to Richard.
Yeah. Good evening. Yes, and thanks very much for your presentation. I knew nothing about scissors, so I was intrigued with what you had to say. Question about files and filing. Do you use a particular type or brand of files for your work?
Yeah, I use Valorbi. Is it Valorbi?
Valorbi, yes. Yeah, okay, yes. Yeah. So well-known Swiss maker, yeah.
Yeah, and if I can get them, Valtitan, which are the same manufacturers, but they're even harder.
Okay, yeah.
And even more expensive.
How do you spell that?
Valtitan, Valtitan.
Valtitan. Okay, thanks very much. I'll look into that. And another question is there are there any sources or books or anything like that for identifying scissors and their age? Like, you know, we talk a lot here about planes and saws, and there are standard works which are very helpful in identifying manufacturers and ages and where they were working and so on. Is there anything like that for scissors?
No.
There is not. Okay.
I mean, there are and they're not.
So if I were to show you this nice little pair of needlework scissors,
yeah. Well, there are. So I have catalogs. So I can date things from catalogs. There's, is there a maker's mark on them?
Yes, Dean, Deane.
I don't.
We can't get it close enough for you to.
It looks Sheffield to me, or it looks British to me. And late Victorian, just from the styling. This strange back, that grind where it goes back became very popular in Sheffield around a particular time, and I don't know why. I wonder whether it's because something changed in their grinding machines that meant that they could do that steep back grind, and then the Germans adopted it for a period of time. But that's that back grind is very kind of indicative of a Sheffield period. And there are
thanks. Yeah, but I was interested that you talked about them having numbers. This is something I've never noticed before, but we've got another pair here, and
you've got the stamp on the under.
You can stamp it. I think it's a number 5 is stamped.
Yeah,
and the number 5 appears on the other one. Yeah. So.
And that would have been to keep the two halves together.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent.
So in really early scissors, they would have been on hand forged scissors. You'd take a rod of steel and you would forge a pair, one on one end and one on the other, and then cut it, and then you'd number them, and then that would be your pair of scissors.
Yes.
And that was because, with early steel having a certain amount of discrepancy of kind of wear resistance and that sort of thing, in a small bar, you could pretty much guarantee that the two blades would be as close as you could get.
Yes.
If you took another bar, then you wouldn't necessarily know that they would be the same alloy and same kind of wear resistance. So that would have been why it was so important to number them straight away.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Oh, thanks very much indeed. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Let's hop over the Atlantic and join Stephen. Stephen, you're muted.
Yep, I am. Let's see. I'm not sure what's going on. There we go. My wife and I have been doing historical reenactment for decades, and our focus is 1820s, 1830s. And the research we've been doing, we found that the reason why there's often no textual writing of the secrets is because the guild system and the masters were the ones who knew how to tweak it and do the final finish work that actually made the product work itself. And the reason why it was never written down is because industrial espionage is you protect your secrets, because that's, if you were really good at your craft, people would buy from you rather than someone down in the next town or whatever. And so I understand why you can't find the secrets of scissors, because once you find that pair of scissors that works for you, you will buy more copies of it, simply because when it no longer cuts, the next pair operates similar to it. So that there is something about scissors that are so unique and so simple, but yet complex. And my wife and I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation today. She's over on the other side. But I just had one question. Is the person who does silhouettes, is her first name Lauren? Ah,
Yes.
very good. She's a friend of ours.
Oh, excellent. She's coming to
And
visit in a couple of weeks.
She's a member of ALFAM, and she just got a grant from Colonial Williamsburg to do some work and research in that area. So good person.
Yeah,
So,
she's coming to visit. We had a Zoom call last week, and she's coming to visit in a couple of weeks' time. So that should be wonderful. And to have that, to have the ability to spend a little bit of time with her, so I can pick her brains regarding her expertise, is going to be invaluable as far as I'm concerned. It's going to be quite wonderful.
yeah, she's very well known here in the States, and very active in ALFAM, which is in fact, we have a number of her portraits in our home. So anyway, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank
well
you.
done. Loved it.
Thanks, Stephen. Shrenik, are you there?
I am. Hi, Grace. Thanks for a brilliant talk. Really enjoyed that. I've got 110 questions, but I'll try and keep to a few of them. I guess the question I had for you is, we can get some lovely new scissors made by the likes of yourself or Ernest Wright, and there's a few other makers around, I'm sure. But picking up old scissors, I think that's always hit and miss, isn't it? We were talking before everyone joined about if they're sharpened wrong, but what makes a good pair of scissors if you were to look in the second-hand market?
Well, I think what I consider a good pair of scissors isn't necessarily what other people consider a good pair of scissors, because I would be looking at kind of less to do with their functionality and more to do with their design features and interesting things from that point of view. But really, as long as they haven't been over sharpened so that there's a huge gap at the fish mouth at the front end, and as long as they're not too rusty, I would encourage anybody to buy any old pair of scissors and see if they can make them work. What's the worst that can happen? Even if you take them apart and you clean the inside and then they don't work, one of the kind of biggest diagnostic tools that I have in my arsenal is to put either toolmaker's dye or just kind of permanent marker on the inside surface and see where they rub. And they really should only rub right on the inside here along the cutting edge, and really they shouldn't be rubbing anywhere else back here. And if you do get rubbing spots, then you know that they're probably catching there. But that I think that I would encourage anybody to just be brave and at least scissors are cheap generally. And I think certainly some of these old ones are worth taking apart and having a look at and seeing whether you can bring them back to life.
You mentioned something there. The old pair of Singer scissors that I was talking about earlier, the tip of them is starting to sort of open up because it's just been sharpened so much. What would you do in that case? Would you then shorten the length of the scissors? Yeah,
that's a completely legitimate thing to do. And that's certainly the safest option. If you can see that they are forged, then, as I said, you can think about tapping in the bows so that they meet and they don't gape at the mouth. But if they're brittle, then you risk them breaking. So yeah, you can just shorten them. That's the safest thing to do.
The last question was, I pick up all these old scissors and they're on the inside face of the blade, they're always hollow ground. And then I've also bought scissors from IKEA and the likes of Fiskars and so on, more modern scissors, and they're not hollow ground. they're flat.
Yeah, they don't need to be. They don't. So, okay. Let's have some examples.
Anton, I love your question. I love your comment. The next question will be on that line.
So these are a pair of Spanish scissors. I can get them out. And they are from these are from 1720. And these are flat, ground on the inside. And all you're after on the inside is clearance. Because as I said, you just want it to touch along this cutting edge here, and everything else you don't want to touch. Now, how you get that clearance behind that cutting edge, it depends on the period, it depends on your technology, and it depends on your own skills. So forged blades can be really hollow and quite embarrassingly floppy, and they still cut. Yeah, it's just making that clearance. So it really doesn't matter whether they're flat or hollow ground.
Okay. The last question I've got is bevel angle. Now, as woodworkers, we have loads of debates around what the right angle of sharpening is.
Mm-hmm.
What is the optimal, or what is the range you're looking at with scissors? Is that, you know, if you were to sharpen them at 90 degrees, would it really matter a lot? What's the
No, so there's a full range, you're right, and it depends on your end use. Safety scissors are at 90 degrees. Well, actually, as scissor makers, we call that 0, which is frustrating because it's like the opposite for knife makers. Now, these little scissors that I've got from that Lauren uses on her paper, they are about 10 degrees. They're really close to being straight across. So basically, you can get a really good cut on a 90-degree angle, and safety scissors are that already. And then the kind of the most acute angle you'd go up to is something like a 40 degree. You wouldn't go any further than that. They get really vulnerable then. And if you're going, and then that's specialist applications like cutting Kevlar and that sort of thing. So
for fabric, what would be sort of the ideal angle? And that's what I'm generally using good scissors for. So
yeah, and it depends on the length of the scissors. So the embroidery scissors get sharpened a little bit. So okay, between 25 and 35 degrees.
Okay, it's about the same for woodworking. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rennie.
Thank you, Grace.
My pleasure.
Phil. Are you there, Phil?
I am, yes, just getting off mute. Hello. Hello, Grace. Thanks for that. I'd echo everyone else's thanks. It was really very interesting to listen through that. One thing I heard early, and you preempted it, which is your experience as a woman going to deal with old men. And you said, really, you hadn't encountered that sort of issue of being a woman. But clearly you were up against other hurdles in terms of catching people while they were still there, while they were still in those trades. I just wondered, that was very much painted as that was then. What's the state of play now in terms of Sheffield cutlers, scissor makers, apart from yourself?
Well, I mean, the great thing with Ernest Wright's is that, well, scissor making is one of the endangered crafts for heritage crafts. And we're still very precarious. And I think the lovely thing is that the work that Ernest Wright's do and the work that I do as far as passing on that information is very complementary to each other. So they're taking these generally youngish, certainly younger than me, people, and they're training them really deeply into the into making scissors the way that they make them. My approach to training is slightly different, and I've done courses this year, and I'll be continuing that as much as possible. I really want as many people as possible to be making scissors. And my approach is slightly different. Mine is bigger and more shallow, and it's generally teaching knife makers to make scissors. And even if they only make a couple of pairs of scissors, or maybe, you know, 1 or 2 scissors a year, that to me is great. That means that means that information is getting passed on and giving the opportunity for other people to play with it. And that was one of the reasons why I think developing a process of making that means that you don't need specialist equipment was really important to me, because it makes it so much more accessible to everybody. What I would, in an ideal world, when I go to Blade Show in 20 years time, if I'm still doing it in 20 years time, I'd like to go and I'd like to see half a dozen other scissor makers making, and doing a whole variety of different styles and that sort of thing. That would, as far as I'm concerned, that would be my goal. I'd love to get more people making scissors.
Okay, and is that a possible objective as of now?
Yes.
Who knows what 20 years will? It's possible. Okay, good.
Yeah. And even, as I said, even if they only make them for a few years and then move on. And I think that it's quite interesting to see that there's been this resurgence in traditional slip joint making. When I go around the knife shows in America, you know, you can see that there seems to be this desire to reinvent, to relook at the traditional slip joint folder. And I feel that scissors can kind of like be swept along with that a little bit. And it'll never be as big. Well, I say never be as big. I don't think it will be as big. It's a little bit more niche than that. But yeah, I'm optimistic. There's such a thirst for the scissor information. Like all the courses that I run, they sell out really quickly, and people love them. So yeah, spread the scissor love.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. And on to Adam.
Yeah, hello. Fascinating, really. I sort of share your passion for research. There was one thing that you said about when we were making the scissors for the silhouette cutter, it all sort of stems around the term expert, really. I think I've been listening to a set of podcasts by a guy called Roger Kneebone. I don't know if you've heard them at all. I was just wondering if you'd actually participated in that, because I'd like to hear a lot more about your research and the way you carry it out. It's quite clear that you've obviously done quite a considerable amount of it. And I was quite intrigued that you said when you were talking about the way that the scissors were going to change when you'd reshape them. And I just wonder why you were uncertain to say that you didn't know how they would change. Is there any sort of do you feel that you've not done enough research, or
No, I absolutely haven't done enough research, and that's one of the reasons why. It's because it's never cropped up before, because I've never made a pair of, this opportunity. So Lauren is in a unique position in that she uses these scissors a lot, and she's very familiar with the handle of them. I think that the changes that changing the heft of them, changing the cross-section of them will be really subtle. And I'm not sure that anybody, apart from somebody who uses scissors all day, every day, as much as Lauren does, would be able to feel the subtle differences. So the fact that I have her coming and I can utilize her expertise means that, so I would say that theoretically it would change it. Would I be able to measure it? I don't think I would, not using the tools that I have. I'd have to rig up a whole test piece. But with Lauren coming, if I can if I can give her the original and the one that I've modified and see whether she can tell the difference, I think that would be really important. I don't know I don't know whether it'd be transferable to any other project. I think it would be really useful to know.
I think she would be able to feel a difference, and there'd obviously be some kind of difference in the way the shaft of the scissors is springing around in her hand. I mean, it might be subtle, but I think she will see a difference. And I feel that with the things that I do, because I do a lot of research on finishes, and I'm working on some carpentry at the moment from 1400, and I can definitely feel a small difference in slight changes to a piece of equipment. But I was really wondered why, I was kind of, it was that you said that you were afraid, or not afraid, but uncertain to say that you didn't know. And is that like a personal sort of, did you feel sort of unsure about yourself, or unsure about your knowledge at all, or anything like that? Or
no, it's not that but there's so little documented, and I certainly would. I feel that it's really important that I don't claim something that I can't back up.
All right. Okay.
So, and there's so little, so few other people doing anything in this field that can either triangulate that if I'm saying that I can feel a difference, or if I think something, there's nobody else in the field that would challenge me. So I feel that it's really important that I don't make claims that I couldn't back up. Really.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much more to. Well, I've got a million questions about your research, but I'm going to take up the whole evening. But it's been fascinating, really, and I'm just wondering if I can find out more about the way that you're working with your research at all. If you've got anything to show, or did you document your research practice or anything like that at all? Or
not really. So I documented the original kind of information that I found kind of a few years ago. I wrote a little book on kind of artisan scissor making, and kind of tried to draw together that so that it was in a useful way that other people could then use and make scissors from. But actually, yeah, it needs updating. I do regular Sunday lunchtime Instagram live feeds where I try and do a little bit of kind of passing on that information. But
so that's on your Instagram account, is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
it's Grace Horne Designs with underscores between each one. So
okay.
Grace _Horne _designs.
Okay, I'll check it out. I'm a bit of an Instagram numpty, but you never know. Might. Great. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for answering my sort of oddball questions. But yeah, it was fascinating, really. I mean, I just love the depth that you've gone into it. It's brilliant, really.
Thank you.
Yeah. Very
Thanks,
nice.
Adam. Grace, I don't know whether you can cope with another question from Matthias, but that would be the last one. Do you think
yes,
you can manage?
by all means. Yeah.
Okay, Matthias.
Thank you. It's going to be a short one to expose my ignorance. You've mentioned it a number of times. What, in the context of folding knives, is a slip joint?
It's the one that relies on a spring
right.
to have it open and shut. So it doesn't lock. It just relies on the spring. Very
right.
traditional Sheffield.
Yes. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Grace. Absolutely fantastic talk, and you've done very well answering all those questions. You're welcome to come back any other time you like.
Thank you. One thing I'd like to say as a final point is if anybody is ever interested in making scissors or wants to know more, contact me. I'd love to help people to kind of, be brave and have a go.
Thanks very much. Well, in the traditional way, we'd like to ask you all to raise a glass and toast absent friends and the bench.
Absent friends and the bench.
Absent friends and the bench.